So for my holiday season, I've been reading a lot of Instagram comments on Rap's page, and my god, the absolute army of zombies that mindlessly spit out the most basic opinions really inspired me to do the exact opposite. So here's 5 of my spiciest music-related takes. Let's go.
Where the fuck my blunt? Where the fuck my cup? Where the fuck my reef?
Okay, so these opinions are kinda in order from coldest to hottest, at least in my opinion, and even though I've seen a lot of criticism of the opium signees by the nerdier side of the music community, I think it's fair to say the general public seems to love both. Either way, in my opinion, both Ken Carson and Destroy Lonely are 2 of the most consistently boring and unoriginal rappers I've ever heard. And FYI, I am a big fan of their label boss and stylistic inspiration, Playboi Carti, but to me, both Ken and Lone lack a key aspect that makes Carti's music so innovative and interesting, and that's his voice. Whereas Carti constantly experiments with his delivery and changes up his vocal inflections to create catchy and memorable refrains in his tracks, whenever I hear Ken Carson or Destroy Lonely on a song, it just sounds like they aren't even trying with their delivery. And combined with their natural voices, which to me sound pretty boring already, it makes for some of the most sleep-inducing songs I've ever heard. It's not just their voices that I don't like though. I also think that their production choices are usually extremely derivative rage beats that, in their attempt to be as hype as possible, just come off as noisy and off-putting. This was especially a problem on Ken's most recent album, A Great Chaos. Like, Lose It has one of the most laughably garbage beats I've heard from a mainstream artist in a very, very long time. And the production being bad is a very big problem when the only redeemable part of their music to me is the occasional really good beat. I mean, hell, the only song across the 2 of them that I actually really like is No Stylist, which is 100% due to the instrumental. Now, obviously, you are allowed to enjoy their music, but for me, until both of them bring something more interesting to theirs, I'm just gonna stick with Carti.
People trying to say I'm going crazy on Twitter. My friends best sit by.
Pretty much everybody who's tried to rank Kanye West's albums from worst to best ends up with a unique list. But one of the most common occurrences in these lists is the placement of The Life of Pablo, with it usually hovering somewhere in the top 5 and occasionally even number 1. And while tlop is a fantastic record in its own right, it is definitely in the bottom 5 for my own personal ranking of Kanye's albums. Maybe even bottom 3. Now don't get me wrong, this project does have some of Kanye's best songs of all time on it. Ultralight Beam is heavenly, Father Stretch My Hands Part 1 is phenomenal, Famous, FML, Real Friends, No More Parties in LA, Saint Pablo, all of these are amazing Kanye songs. But despite this, Pablo's biggest flaw is the lack of consistency, as it's the Kanye album that has the most whatever songs on it, besides Jesus is King and maybe Donda. Feedback's beat is pretty hard but kinda grating to the ears. Highlights is alright but really had way more potential. Wolves is absolutely ruined by Sia, and even then it isn't that strong to begin with. 30 Hours is an excellent first half but falls off during Kanye's unfinished third verse, and then the rest of the tracks are pretty good but not up to Kanye's usual level of quality in my opinion. Now obviously when you have an album with as many songs as Pablo does, some of them will feel slightly lackluster, but with Kanye specifically, the lackluster tracks feel significantly more noticeable given how consistently excellent his albums usually are. The College Dropout, Graduation, Dark Twisted Fantasy, Yeezus, hell even Ye all have track lists with like 1 or 2 skips max, compared to Pablo which arguably has 5 or more. Of course it's not Kanye's worst album, that'd undoubtedly be Jesus is King, and I'd probably even put it above Donda and maybe 808s, but it's definitely not up there with his other 6 records, all of which I consider to be near flawless.
Tell me, is you still love?
With the end of the year coming up, we of course got loads of top albums of 2023 lists, and it's no surprise that Travis Scott's Utopia is all over them, usually pretty high up. And if you asked me back in August while the album was still fresh, I could have absolutely seen myself putting it among my favorite albums of the year. But as more and more time has passed, I just find that a lot of the tracks just aren't sticking with me. The only ones I can think of that have stayed at the same level of quality right now are Hyena, Modern Jam, Sirens, Lost Forever, and Telekinesis, with half of those due to the performances of the features. The second half of My Eyes is still really fantastic, but I see the first half as less of a nice tribute to Frank Ocean, and more of just a straight ripoff of his style. Meltdown just doesn't hold a candle to Sicko Mode, the shock factor of a new Carti voice we got on Fiend is worn off, so it's really the beat doing the heavy lifting. I Know just feels painfully average for Travis Scott standards, and Circus Maximus just doesn't do enough to separate itself from Black Skinhead anymore, making it come off as a bootleg version. That's another thing too. The heavy Yeezus influence Utopia has was pretty cool to hear at first, but now it's just another aspect that's made the record age worse, since it really only takes going back to Yeezus to see how much better its sound was executed when compared to Utopia, especially considering it came out 10 years prior. But by far the worst problem with the album that makes it age worse and worse as time goes on is the criminal lack of lyrical introspection from Travis, considering what had happened only a few years prior. And look, I know Travis isn't known for being an amazing lyricist or anything, but I'm sorry, if you have multiple people dying at one of your shows, And in your apology press run, you really fail to show any accountability or remorse. You have to either put your honest thoughts in the music or just avoid the topic altogether. But on Utopia, you have Travis half addressing the controversy for like 4 lines on My Eyes, and then the rest of the record has bars like this, which are at best insensitive to the people that lost their lives at the concert, and at worst just come off as straight up evil and remorseless. And I know, I'm gonna hear the classics separate from the artist argument here, but when the artist is half-assedly putting a dark topic in the music without any of the care and nuance a topic like that needs, it makes the artist come off as kind of a piece of shit, and makes the music significantly harder to get behind.
Check. Yes.
So I've been listening to a lot of Drake's older records recently for whatever reason, and during this binge I had a bit of an epiphany. On the internet I hear so often that Drake's newer music is trash when compared to his older stuff, but in my opinion, across Drake's entire music career, his level of quality has more or less stayed the same. And yes, that means not only do I think his later albums aren't nearly as bad as people say, I also think his older albums are not nearly as good as people say. The 3 records that made me realize this the most were Take Care, Nothing Was the Same, and If You're Reading This It's Too Late. With Take Care, I mean yeah, it has some of Drake's best ever tracks like Over My Dead Body, Headlines, Crew Love, Marvin's Room, Lord Knows, and The Ride, to name a few, but it also has some total skips on it, specifically on the second half. Camera/Good Ones Go interlude, Doing It Wrong, Look What You've Done, and Practice are all way too slow and boring for me. And then you have stuff like HYFR, where Drake's verse is just terribly offbeat.
I took her for sushi, she wanted to fuck, so we took it to go, told him don't even play it, and we never talk too much after I blew.
And then the motto, of course, is complete dog shit, and I will stand by that to my grave. Moving on to Nothing Was the Same, once again you have some classics like Tuscan Leather, Wu-Tang Forever, Hold On We're Going Home, and Pound Cake, etc., etc. But then started from the bottom, Own It, Connect, The Language, and 305 to My City are just kinda whatever. And then If You're Reading This is definitely the most consistently excellent project, but that's pretty much the only exception. When you really look at it, every Drake album has the same format, where you get some of the best songs in his catalog, but then also a bunch of really forgettable ones. And this even applies to his newer albums, believe it or not. Scorpion has Elevate, 8 out of 10, Nice for What, In My Feelings, and After Dark. CLB has Champagne Poetry, TSU, Pipe Down, 7am on Bridle Path, Race My Mind, and Get Along Better. Even For All the Dogs has Virginia Beach, First Person Shooter, Slime You Out, Tried Our Best, 8am in Charlotte, and the entire deluxe. All tracks among Drake's best ever floating in a sea of mid. And it's funny because every time there's a new Drake album, the same pattern happens. It gets grilled within the first week, with tons of people saying it's nothing compared to old Drake, and then as the years go by, people start to go back and find some of the gems in the tracklist, and then make the claim that the album was overhated on release and is actually really good compared to the next new Drake album that releases. But in my opinion, nearly every album of Drake's across his entire discography has ranged from good to amazing. They just usually aren't consistent.
And if I die before your album drop, I hope.
And finally, we end with what I think is the hottest take that I'll have in this entire video. Now let me just clear the air first and say that I do really enjoy Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City overall, and it has a lot of my all-time favorite Kendrick songs on it, such as The Art of Peer Pressure, Money Trees, and of course arguably his best ever song, Sing About Me I'm Dying of Thirst. And even with the tracks that I don't love, there's consistently top-tier lyricism from Kendrick that weaves together one of the best stories I've ever heard in an album. But if you know me, you'll know that I'm very picky when it comes to the actual sound of a song, and usually care a lot more about it than the writing. And for me, what holds the record back the most is just a lot of the very dated sonic choices. Stuff like the hook and drums on Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, drums on Poetic Justice, and pretty much the entire instrumental on Swimming Pools just don't sit right with me, and makes me enjoy all the songs mentioned significantly less. It's not all bad, obviously. I think the more amateur production style works with the concept of backseat freestyle very well as helps with the intensity of Kendrick's rapping on the track Mad City, but overall I just feel like a lot of the instrumentation holds back the overall quality of the record, leading me to feeling like it's more in the 7 to 8 range rather than the 10 out of 10 album that a lot of people believe it is. I'd also like to clarify again that I'm not trying to say that this album is objectively trash or anything, this is all just my opinion. And also, for reference, I think To Pimp a Butterfly and Damn are both ridiculously good, so I'm not just some Kendrick Lamar hater. At the end of the day, Good Kid, Mad City is an album that I respect a lot, but just not one that I absolutely adore, and probably never will. And that's fine. Alright, and those are 5 of the hottest music takes that I have. If you disagreed with most or all of them, I'm sure you'd like to hear some more, and lucky for you, I've been told that a lot of my takes are hot garbage, so make sure to like the video, and subscribe to see more bad opinions courtesy of me. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching as always, and I look forward to seeing all the comments disagreeing with me. Bye!